Who will be Washington's next commit?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports is Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to get into some UW basketball transfer portal updates, talk about, some of the team needs a little bit, talk about Jase Butler, who is looking for a new home at this point in time. We're going to talk a little bit about Washington's running game, what that's going to look like, because Jonah Coleman's role, something you and I were talking a lot about over the last couple of days, something that's going to be really, really interesting going into the 2025 season. So we thought, hey, let's just give it a nice little breakdown as we are in the offseason. Still got a couple weeks before spring practice. So we'll get to all that. But the biggest question, as Brady Smigiel has cut his list down to 4 teams. A couple other guys might be announcing over the next couple of weeks, maybe over the, by the end of the month, maybe into April. The biggest question is, Lars, who will be Washington's next commit in the 2026 class?
Well, I think just based on who's announcing, like CJ Lavender, I believe, is coming up to his announcement is coming up on the 21st, I want to say.
That's correct, yeah.
So that one was one, obviously, where Washington's heavily in the mix. I would probably I thought Brady was committing in December. So, that one's been,
Sure.
Whatever that one happens to drop, if that happens to drop before CJ, so be it. I would be surprised if that's a random drop. So I'm going to say CJ Lavender from Outer Day is your next commit for Washington. But Brady is not too far behind. Until he puts out a date, I have a hard time believing Brady. Again, I view Brady as like a heavy Washington lean, he's got the Washington jacket underneath something else right now, and he hasn't fully revealed it yet. But all indications are he's headed to Washington. But since he hasn't put out his commitment date yet, I can't put him before CJ.
So I like where you're going with that. Let's start there because I also believe that it's CJ Lavender. But starting with Brady Smigiel, after he dropped his top 4 on Friday afternoon, it was one of those things where, we kind of felt that one was coming. And it feels like right now he's at a point where he's doing his due diligence, where he's going to take an unofficial to Michigan. He'll probably take an unofficial to both South Carolina and USC, maybe even set up his officials. We'll see what that ends up looking like. But it's exactly what you said, where at this point in time, how can you not consider him a UW lean? We did a whole show about it last week, right? Where on top of that, the crystal balls are in. Andrew Nemec's got his with Sports Illustrated, Steve Wiltfong and Chad Simmons with On 3, where, when those crystal balls start rolling in, it's because people are hearing something. And whatever that be, we're not inferring anything about that right now. But you can say the same thing with CJ Lavender, where that's what's in on the 247 sports side of things, where he's down to 6 schools: Miami, Oklahoma, Stanford, Texas A&M, and USC, I believe, are his other 5. And he's one of those guys where he's a really interesting prospect on film, where a little bit undersized if he wants to play safety full time. I think he looks really good in the nickel. But I would also say that he would be the next commit because just based on announced commitments, unless there's, things happen all the time where a kid decides, hey, I'm going to announce today or I'm going to announce tomorrow. That stuff does happen. But with everything that you and I both know, that feels like the next one that Husky fans are going to want to tune in for, because it seems like Washington made a real impact with just defensive backs as a whole over the course of junior day. Obviously, right? We saw Elijah Durr commit. We saw Kasani Giles commit. And now all of a sudden that room is pretty solid in terms of what you're recruiting, and you can continue to go after some high caliber prospects, whether it be Devon Benjamin or Chase Calicut, whatever that might look like. We're getting Chase Calicut back up on an official visit is a huge win for this staff. But that I feel like that's the most logical choice at this point in time.
Yeah, well, it's also one of those things that allows me to justify that wave tweet that I know people were asking you about a week and a half ago. It was the Cali wave, and it was just, when is the wave coming? When is it cresting? When is it crescendoing? And again, it's not a when, like a singular date. It's just like, hey, this is the start of something. And Kasani Giles, like I said on the podcast, was the start of the Cali wave, or kind of just a wave of defensive commits that are coming in, which is also why CJ Lavender's in the consideration, because both came up the same weekend for the junior day. We had heard CJ was pretty heavily already, interested in Washington. We didn't honestly mention Kasani Giles as much as we probably should have, but that was one that kind of did catch us not off guard totally, but I think, was a little surprised as to how early it came in the commitment order of things. But CJ would have been one like had CJ committed first and then Kazani, I wouldn't have been surprised. But the fact that both are committing in the same month, also not really a surprise when you look back at it. So I think you're starting to build out the secondary. You mentioned Devon Benjamin you're mentioning more California guys. I think, like that Cali wave is just starting, and this class really is going to be heavily catered towards, a lot of the top guys that they're considering in California.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So I want to throw another name at you here, where I know he just said his official visits. I'm pulling them up as we speak, so I wanted to make sure I got those right. Yeah, the other official visits are Cal, Michigan State, and Arizona State, and that's Fa Siale, where this is another guy where, we talked a little bit about him last week, where you want to make sure that you can start this defensive line class. Whatever it's going to look like, you want a solid building block where, obviously if Derek Coleman-Bruce or Bot Mulitalo, whoever else wants to commit right now, that's great for your program. And you obviously are going to take that and try to hold on for as long as you can. But you want to build it around guys, local guys that have a really high floor and are a solid building block. And I think Fa Siale is a really great name to mention where, yeah, he just said all his official visits, but it's one of those things where we know that Washington is pushing really hard for him. And the whole O'Day thing with Taylor Mays has made a connection with him, and Jason Kafusi has done a really good job recruiting that group so far this year, that he's one of those guys where if you want to start a class and just a really solid point, that he's the name that I would bring up, because I like David Shores a lot as a player. I think he really has a lot of room to grow and play inside and outside at the next level. And I'd say the same about Fa Siale. But Fa is a little bit higher rated in terms of where he's at in 247 right now. And you want somebody that can just say, all right, yeah, that's a trendsetter. That's a guy who we can go get behind, a lot like Asani Giles was, where all these guys are kind of following his lead. I would say that Siale falls into that boat.
I agree. Although I think the interesting thing is I might just say David Schwartz might commit first of the two because you mentioned the official visits. Although in that same breath, how many guys have we known, even let's say last spring where they set official visits and then 2 visits in, they commit. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm not taking the rest of my visits. And it's like, okay, well, so how much did those late May, early June visits matter? Because I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, when is Siale coming up to?
His early June 6th.
Okay. So that might be one where he could commit to Washington at any time and then just not take his other officials and then come up for the official in June. And being a local guy, could honestly come up for any of the visit weekends he so chooses as an unofficial visitor. So with that being said, it's more of there's no set date. The ideal for Washington is, especially with spring ball coming around the corner in March, can you get, let's say, call it a half dozen more of these guys in the boat over the course of April, where you're going into May and June with, okay, now we got some of these guys that we had set official visits for locked in, a Brady Smigiel, an Fa Siale, David Schwartz, all those guys, and then they can play recruiter when they come up for their official. I think they're in pretty good position with all 3 of those guys to kind of follow that same track. And that makes those visitor lists even more unique, because then now you start to look and say, okay, well, they're not visiting there. Who else can you stack? And then you're getting 3 or 4 commits per weekend.
Right.
Kids that are already committed in the class coming up on those visits. So that way you're spreading them out where you're not having all the commits come in one weekend and try and see if you can get a couple extra bonuses like we saw last year.
So I want to throw one more name at you. Somebody who's, you talk about that first weekend of visits where guys, hey, I really like this visit. Yeah, I'm coming here. I'm shutting it all down. Brian Bonner. He set his official visit for the end of April, and I don't think he's going to be the next commit, where we're certainly going to see more between now and April 25th when he's scheduled to arrive for his official. But that's a guy that I'm really going to be keeping a close eye on, because I think Scottie Graham has done a great job recruiting him. I think he would be a fantastic addition to this class, where Scottie Graham has done a really great job with the position, adding, Ansu Sanoe to this class, Julian McMahon and Quaid Carr in 25. We know the 24 class looks like with Adam Mohammed and Jordan Washington. But this is one of those ones where just the key piece of everything, one of the highest rated running backs in the country, if you're able to lock him up early, he seems to have a really strong relationship with Scottie. And that seems to be one where, hey, yeah, I want to make this my first official visit, where if I'm still not feeling it at the end of this one, I can step back and reassess things, but I'm feeling really good about where I am with Washington. I know I likened it to this player last week in Raiden Weisbrey, where he knew he had a strong relationship with the staff and said, yeah, let me come up, let me get this over with, because I love where the staff is headed and I want to be a part of it. Lars, speaking of running backs, we need to talk about Jonah Coleman. We'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Factor. Eating healthy doesn't have to be complicated with Factor. You get chef-made, dietitian-approved meals that are ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, so you can fuel your body without the hassle of cooking. Factor meals arrives fresh, never frozen, with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences each week. You can customize your menu to fit your goals. Whether that's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. I love how Factor keeps you on track with healthy, delicious meals without the time-consuming prep. The Korean beef bowl and creamy Parmesan chicken are some of my favorites. They taste homemade, but take no effort. Factor also offers smoothies, breakfasts, and snacks, so you always have something nutritious ready to go. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code factorpodcast to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code factorpodcast at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. We've also got a message from our friends over at Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. Supply House, whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. So, Lars, Jonah Coleman's role this season is going to be a really interesting one to watch because with Adam Mohammed in the mix, with Jordan Washington expected to take a big leap forward in terms of his role when we talked to Scottie Graham about him in February, plus DeMond Williams being in the mix as the full-time starter, I don't know if we're going to see him get as many touches as we did last season, but I think it could make him more effective.
Yeah, well, there's a catch of rushing attempts or total snaps because Jonah Coleman is the best blocker in that room, still bar none.
Yeah.
Like Adam Mohammed was good, but if Adam Mohammed can take that blocking, step, then I think Jonah might have a little bit lower snap count. But I do agree in the sense of one thing we've seen from Jonah is he doesn't need. Again, we talk about this all the time, where he could be a 20 to 25 carry guy, but he's shown over his time in Arizona and last season at Washington. He doesn't need to be. He can give you the 4, 5, 6 yards per carry, where he only needs really, call it 15, maybe 18 tops. Where if you get up to 20, 21, so be it. But you're never going to be that bell cow, 25 to 30, just because this offense with Adam Mohammed, Jordan Washington, Quade Carr, Julian McMahon, all those guys, even some of the receiver options that they can go out of, you don't need it. And so I think that's why it might be. And also when you look at midway through, let's call it October, where Jonah, it was probably the Rutgers game where he kind of started getting injured, getting a little bit nicked and bumped, and then the Iowa game, and then you just kind of saw a crescendo from there where, we love Jonah, but maybe he shouldn't be taking as many hits unnecessarily as was required. And I think part of that becomes, well, hey, let's see how much of an improved blocker Adam Mohammed can be. How much can, Julian McMahon or anybody else in that room step up in that respect and kind of spell Jonah on some of those, blocking plays where he doesn't have to get nicked and you can kind of use him in different ways. But overall, it's like, well, again, no pun intended here. It's like having a Ferrari. Like you want to use it, but is it your everydayer or is it you kind of like you're spelling it a little bit more because you have another couple of cars in the shop?
So I like where you're going with that because let's dive into this. He had 216 touches last year, 193 carries, and 23 catches. Where I think a big part of just everything that played into Washington's offense last season was the offensive line struggles as the season went along. Whereas fine at first, you just kind of saw things deteriorate with injuries and other things like that. And with Jonah, Jedd talked about the knee thing. He didn't necessarily tell us, but he talked about it with, I think it was with the Peacock crew or something, where he mentioned it ahead of the Indiana game, I believe. And it's one of those things where getting him some time off really did help him out, where 9 carries at Iowa was part of this. But as the season went on, I don't think we saw him get less effective. I think as things started to break down around him and as Washington's season started to falter in a couple of different aspects, that's what just kind of made Washington's run game as a whole less effective, where you look at the Oregon game and you look at the Louisville game too, where it just, the offensive line was not good enough to get what needed to be done. But that being said, I still don't think that we're going to see Jonah get 216 touches again. And I think that's okay, because you talk about Adam Mohammed, where he was one of 4 players with 40-plus carries last season, even if you take out just dropbacks for Demond, that where he got sacked, since that technically counts as a rushing attempt. He's still over that number as well. And I think that's going to be really helpful for him. You talk about Adam Mohammed taking a big step forward. I want to talk about Jordan Washington a little bit, because shout out to Tyler Owens, by the way. You and I have had some conversations about the strength staff on this here show. He put out some Instagram stories over the weekend of the guys that looked like they were maxing out on back squats. And Jordan Washington, who's listed at 178 pounds on the roster, did 2 reps of 405. Like that, this is what we talk about with the strength staff, and it's getting these guys bigger, faster, stronger. That's going to help him out so much over the course of the season, just showing that, hey, like obviously it's one thing to lift weight, and it's a whole nother one to take hits on a football field, but it just shows that he is getting physically ready for the college level. Because if it's not just 2 guys, if you're working in a third, and then obviously with Demond, there's a 4th option to run the ball, all of that is just going to do nothing but make Jonah more effective. If let's just say he ends the season with 170 touches, so cutting it down by like 50, right? That keeps him fresher. It keeps everybody else in the room fresher. And it keeps defenses off balance, because this is the thing that you and I were kind of talking about with Scottie Graham. We've done this off the record. We've done it on the record a little bit too, is he recruits backs that are, different types of players, where Adam Mohammed and Jordan Washington are 2 very different players. But in the same sense, you can rely on them as pass catchers out of the backfield. I think Adam is a little bit better of a pass blocker at this point in time. And it's not necessarily Jordan Washington's greatest skill set, but if you needed him to run between the tackles, he could. Adam thrives in that department. But it's something where, you're not looking at it and, oh, hey, Adam Mohammed's on the field, it's a passing down, or Jonah's on the field, they're going to hand the ball off to him. No, you have guys that can be true threats on all 3 downs. And again, I'm making that sound a lot wordier than it needs to be, because you're not going to use those guys in that way, because you have such a well-rounded room of running backs. And Scottie Graham deserves a lot of credit for how that room has been built. And I think we're going to see it continue to improve this season.
Well, we also saw it at times last season where you had Adam Mohammed and Jonah Coleman lined up in the same backfield. And now this season you add in the mix of throw Jordan Washington in the slot. Yeah. There you go. Like this is also the impetus, is like, this is how like the hierarchy of football works. Scottie Graham gets you the horses. Jedd properly uses the horses. That's how this whole thing works, is where Jedd, now the impetus is on Jedd to say, hey, I got some 3 good running backs. Figure out a way to use them. And I was looking at them quickly as you were mentioning some of those other stats at Arizona, where nobody had really over 100, call it 80 carries except for once. Yeah. And now again, a lot of that is we have 2 seniors in DJ Wiley and the other name is escaping me here, along with Jonah in that backfield. And now you're looking at Jonah and saying, okay, now Jonah is obviously the guy. There isn't a second senior in that mix, but you have a ton of up and coming, sophomores and redshirt freshmen and guys like that in Jordan Washington and Adam Mohammed. So you have to find a way to get them up without necessarily totally knocking Jonah. But I think it's also a good situation to be in, because you're not going and looking for that second upperclassman transfer in the spring portal. Sure. You're not looking and saying, hey, well, we need to supplement Jonah because God forbid we give him more than 12 carries a game. No, it's just make sure you use him correctly. Like, you have the horse to do it. It's like, give Marshawn the ball at the 1. You have the guy to do it. It's just a matter of making sure you don't wear him out between the 20 and the 20. Like, that's the whole point here with Jonah, because he'll get you between the 20s, but you also have a bunch of other guys who can as well.
Right, and that's just the most important part of it. It's just keeping guys fresh and keeping them in a deep, steady rotation that keeps defenses off balance for a number of different reasons, because the demand factor in all of this, I think, is, I don't want to say it's the most important part, but it's something that not every team has. Where, we've had our good buddy Jake Butt on this podcast and said, hey, Jedd has told me that he might be the fastest player on the team. Like, he might be a 4.3 guy. And watching him run, I think you and I both believe that he certainly can hit that number. But on top of that, it's just having somebody who is just so elusive in the backfield, where if it is a read option, where, I mean, it is what it is at this point in time. But if you want to just throw 2 running backs out there and run the triple option, I feel like that's something that Jedd might be able to throw into the mix this year. There's just having somebody like Demond opens this playbook up in a number of ways that Will Rogers unfortunately just didn't last season. It's something you and I talked about. And the more we see Damon Williams, where, he wasn't ready to do that, maybe week 4, week 5 against Northwestern, against Michigan, where you can try it and you can work a couple of things out like he did, which is one of the things you and I like about the way that the Damon situation was handled. But now, with more time under his belt, more reps, and guys that he's really comfortable with around him, it makes it a whole lot easier because Jonah is one of the stars of this team. He's become one of the most recognizable faces, one of the most important players, and he's playing a position that just isn't necessarily valued the way that it was 15, 20 years ago, where 15, 20 years ago, he's the kind of guy that would be, you talk about a bell cow, 25, 30 carries, where, yeah, that's absolutely the way that you'd want to use a player like that. But that's not the case anymore. And with the way this room has been built, you don't need to do that, so you can keep him fresh. And, let's say you're going into November and you're sitting in a really nice spot. Let's say they're 7-2. Let's throw that out there. You're sitting there at 7-2 and it's, oh, hey, we don't have to worry about, managing Jonah's workload down the stretch because he's not as dinged up as he was last year. And you feel a lot better about the situation that you're in and what it does for your offense as a whole. But Lars, let's switch gears here because Washington saw a 4-star guard enter the portal. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props to tournament games happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com to get in on the college action all tournament long. So Lars, Washington saw 4-star guard Jase Butler enter the transfer portal after one season on Montlake. It's something where I'm really curious to see how Danny Sprinkle wants to utilize this backcourt because it's something he talked to us about in his final press conference of the season after the Oregon game, where I asked him what he needed to do to close out games better. And he said, we really need somebody who can create their own shot, take that, that tough step back three, and is getting double teamed. And I'm not saying that Jase couldn't do those things, but I think just the way that this whole guard room really is kind of being overhauled, where you're getting a couple guys leaving in Tyree Iheanacho and DJ Davis. And then you've also, we'll see what happens with Zoom Diallo. I think he's going to stick around. But between Zoom Diallo, Tyler Harris, and Makai Mason, you didn't really have that guy, or at least Danny didn't trust any of them to become that guy at this point last season. I think Makai might have a case for it if he continues to shoot the ball the way he did down the stretch. But I think that's going to be one of the most important things that Danny's going to be looking for in the transfer portal, after you get JJ Mandequick coming in and Cortland Muldrew coming in as well, is somebody who, the player that he compared that to was Jackson Shelstad at Oregon, where somebody who, he's going to take a crazy three, but it's going to go in because he just has that in him, where I'm just curious to see what that's going to look like in the portal.
Yeah, I think, of the two, and again, Jay's obviously a great kid, totally understand, him wanting to kind of reassess things, because if you look at his usage rate, it wasn't necessarily what it was with Zoom down the stretch, especially. And I think at that point, you could kind of see where it's like, okay, of the two freshman guards that came in, because remember, only two high schoolers came in last year. It was Zoom Diallo and Jase Butler. So of those two, Danny's looking to say, okay, one of you guys is going to emerge as the point guard, or at least the, option off the bench in a way. And Zoom became that guy over the season where physically, what he was able to kind of show that he could do the drive. And again, it wasn't perfect. It had plenty of turnovers, so it wasn't great, but it was, I think, workable enough to where Danny can look at it and say, all right, we're projected Zoom will come back, or let's have in the conversation of, again, I don't see a reason why Zoom would go. Again, in this day and age, you can never be so short. But I would be very surprised if Zoom isn't back. And then you mentioned Makai Mason, he's back. You have two more coming in. So now you're looking to supplement probably maybe one or two in the portal. Maybe
Probably one.
Right. But I think, again, we've understood with Danny where he doesn't, kind of like Jedd, you're going to use the portal, but you really don't want to build your program off of it. And I think for Danny, it's just making sure, okay, we have enough, veteran experience in the backcourt to where they can help Zoom along, and I don't have to just throw Zoom into the fray. Where that's kind of what Tyree Iheanacho did this past season, where he was able to play that 2-guard spot, be a defender, help some of the younger guys along. Louis Corey was supposed to be that. Another guy that didn't.
I knew I was forgetting the name,
and didn't necessarily pan out. No slight at Louis, because I know he's kind of going through some things. But you just look at all those, and that's why, again, you can't bank on the portal because, well, one guy proved to be a starter, and you knew he wasn't going to be a shooter in Tyree, but you were going to get the defense. And then you're looking at Lewis is kind of that tough, maybe 7-8 guy off the bench, and number 7, number 8, not 7-8, like just to be clear for people.
Yeah.
With that being said, and that never materialized. And so I think Danny would prefer to go with the high school ranks because you can mold a Cortland Mulliger, you can mold a JJ Maniquit, have them for a couple of years. Like I don't expect either of those guys to transfer after 1 year, no matter what their usage rate is, but I also don't expect them to be sitting on the bench as much because this is also the benefit, in hindsight, of Danny having a full season and then running into the offseason as the head coach already, where last season he was playing catch up, and most of the guys in the portal were they were just not top options. Aside from Greg Osterbohr, who, again, that's a separate case. Like the guys they brought in were good, but not great in the sense of like, you're kind of hoping to maximize this guy or hoping this guy can do this or hoping this guy can fill that role. Now you have the beginning of the portal window to say, okay, go get the guys you need. Go get the front. Really, go get the front court help. Let's be real, not the back court. Go get the front court help.
So that's what I wanted to talk about, because one thing that that we can kind of say on top of this is from the way Washington competed for a lot of these guys in the portal last year, we know the resources will be there. You can infer that however you want, but that's all that needs to be said on that matter. The resources will be there for this team to go out and get the guys they want. And it's exactly what you said. It's veteran help in the front court, where you and I expect Frank Kepnang to be back. He's proven that when he is on the floor, he's a force to be reckoned with, and he can be one of the better defenders in the Big Ten, one of the tougher, more physical presences, but he needs to be on the floor consistently for that to happen. So with getting him back, with getting Chris Conway back, bringing in Nico Bundalo, bringing in Matty Traore from the junior college ranks, that's really solid. You're getting Casey Ibekwe back for another year too. I have a feeling that somebody might end up hitting the transfer portal. We'll see how that ends up working out just in terms of the depth and everything. But I think Danny is going to go out and say, I want at least one, probably two experienced big men to just really help establish a physical presence down low, because there were too many times where Wilhelm Breidenbach was Washington's only big man on the floor this past season. And, then you struggle to rebound the basketball. That didn't necessarily work out the way that you wanted it to. But at the same point in time, you want to make sure that these guys are just threats on both ends of the floor. And that wasn't something that we saw consistently. Like I think that with Casey Ibekwe, he's a really strong defender. I really love what he brings to the defensive end of the floor, but Danny didn't feel comfortable throwing him out there. And he said as much against teams that were able to spread the floor a little bit. So he just didn't get the usage he might've wanted to. And I'm curious to see how that might change just in the way that he's going to attack the transfer portal, because there's one other thing that he needs, and that's just a lights out shooter.
Yeah, well, okay. Marsh's favorite month is the white house shooter that randomly he's gonna be an insurance agent in a couple of months, but for now he's not gonna miss for 40 minutes. Those guys are hard to find. It's one of those where you thought DJ Davis was gonna be that guy. Was that guy on a handful of nights? Was absolutely not that guy on another handful of nights. And so, are you gonna get that type of shooter, or are you gonna get? Because again, yes, you have the resources, but like it's one of those where, you're not going to go necessarily shopping because you're not going to go look at the top, 20 shooters in the country and say, hey, okay, we want 2 of these guys. Well, that's not really how it works. What I think is interesting, and kind of going back to your front court, and I'll get back to the backcourt debate here in a second, but the front court, as I was thinking about it, you almost kind of have to view both Casey and Frank as like an 8 and an 11, in the sense of like, you can't really bank on them as starters because you haven't seen it. So if I'm Danny, I'm almost wondering, like, I don't think Frank is going to transfer. So maybe I'm just speculating. I'm not just kind of working through the numbers here. If KC were to transfer, then you go bring in a number 1 center, number 1 5, and then you have Frank, and then you have Curtis, and because you're playing it. Because here's the thing: we saw what happened this year, where they thought they were going to have Chris Conway healthy and Frank Kepnang healthy, and then for the start of the season you did, except for Chris, but then by mid-November you're like, ooh, we don't really have a front court here.
Right. And that's the thing, where if you bring in a couple more guys, we're adding some of those through the high school ranks, through the transfer portal, junior college, really, in Nico Bundalo and Matty Traore is a really, really important part of this, where Matty has some Big Ten experience at Maryland. And he's somebody who has the offensive skill set that you're looking for. To just watching some of the shout out UW Hoops World, by the way, that account is fantastic, especially with the Matty Traore highlights, where seeing some of the stuff he's been able to do at the junior college level, obviously it might not be the same at D1, but having somebody with that skill set is really important. You know what Nico Bandalo can do. You've seen it. That his recruiting ranking backs that up. And then adding somebody where I disagree, where I think Frank can be that number one starting center, but having more depth behind him is important. You didn't have a Matty Traore behind him last season. I still think you need depth. I don't think you're wrong there. I completely agree with you. But I think that you can't count on Frank to stay healthy. And that's why you brought in somebody like Matty to have that extra impact. And now you just go and you continue to add that depth to the transfer portal, where it's somebody who can play 20, 25 minutes a game and just give you a little bit more at both ends of the floor.
I think we're both saying the same thing. I think even Frank would tell you this, where I don't think he would feel threatened if they brought in a starter, because then I would imagine Casey of the two would transfer out. And then if Frank happens to beat the guy out, or you happen to try and figure out that problem later on down, that's a good problem to figure out. Is
sure.
How do I use Frank and this 7-foot center that we brought into the portal? That's a good problem to have versus this past season, which is who's above 6'8" and can play the 4 or the 5. Like that was where you were at this season. And so I don't think Frank would take it personally. I just think, especially with what Danny's building in year 2 and year 3, you need to, and with the roster being able to expand, and you have Dominic Diamante and all those guys, though, that's the type of, Frank can be your 8 or he can be your 1. Pick one, but it's a good problem to have along with Matty Traore. And I think it's just you're strengthening the depth is really what we're getting at here.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all everybody who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.